The radios crackled with static, voices overlapped, sharp with tension. The mission was stalling, wind tore across the ridge, and visibility dropped to nothing. Orders barked. No one moved. She stood at the edge of the chaos, silent in a plain uniform, unseen by most. The map in her hand showed what the others missed: a gap in the storm, a path through. Without waiting for permission, she stepped forward, pointed once, and spoke. The team followed. The outcome changed. No one cheered, no one clapped, but they all saw it. She had seen what mattered. The sun hammered down on the isolated military base, painting the world in hard light and shimmering heat. The air wavered above the tarmac, distorting outlines of the distant aircraft and sending waves of ripples across the vision of anyone who dared to look out too far. The scent of fuel and scorched concrete rose in thick layers, mingling with the dry grit carried on every gust of hot wind. Soldiers moved across the open expanse with practiced ease, their boots polished to mirror shine, their uniforms sharp at every seam. Rifles gleamed beneath the sun, every barrel spotless, every sight adjusted and checked twice. In the heart of the base, where canvas awnings offered no true shelter from the relentless glare, teams assembled. They swapped jokes and boasts, loud with confidence as they prepared for the marksmanship competition that would define the day. At the far edge of this polished spectacle, where dust gathered thick in the corners and no cameras pointed, a figure moved quietly. Ella carried the weight of an ammo crate in both hands, the wood scarred and stained from long use. The crate's surface bore faded numbers, worn smooth in places where fingers had gripped it over the years. Her boots were scuffed and dust-caked, the kind of dust that settled on those who worked rather than those who posed. She wore faded jeans that bore the creases of labor, and a shirt that had once been blue, but now faded to the color of the sky after a long drought. Her hair was tied back in a plain knot, not for style, but for practicality. She walked without hurry, her steps even, each footfall absorbed by the hum of the base's energy. No one noticed her. No one paused to ask her name or offer help. The main range shimmered in the heat, beyond the line of gleaming rifles and spotting scopes. Dignitaries clustered beneath white tents, their faces shaded by caps and mirrored sunglasses. The visitors wore smiles of polite interest, their conversations light, their attention only half on the soldiers who demonstrated their weapons and half on the drinks waiting beneath the shade. Officers barked orders in clipped tones that rang out across the tarmac. But none of those commands were for Ella. She crossed the open space behind the main line, unseen by the crowd but aware of every detail. The soldiers closest to the firing line adjusted their scopes and leaned into their weapons, posing for photographs that would later grace the base newsletter. Their laughter rose easily, blending with the metallic clicks of safety catches and the low whine of range equipment warming in the sun. Their uniforms bore crisp patches denoting elite units, and their boots left clean prints on the swept concrete. They moved like men certain of their place, confident in the gaze of the officers and VIPs who watched them. Ella lowered the crate beside the supply tent and straightened slowly. A bead of sweat traced down her temple, but she did not brush it away. The dust clung to her boots and the hem of her jeans, a quiet mark of work, done far from the eyes of those who mattered. She paused, scanning the activity without appearing to do so. She saw the way the rifles were cradled with pride. She noted the way the soldiers stood with feet wide, shoulders square, voices loud enough to carry. She took in the polished vehicles parked in neat rows, their paint reflecting the sun like glass. The entire scene hummed with the energy of performance, of readiness displayed for applause. One of the officers strode past, clipboard in hand, barking orders to a junior who jogged to keep up. Neither glanced at Ella. The officer's boots clicked sharply on the concrete, leaving crisp echoes that marked his passage like punctuation. A group of soldiers near the far end of the range adjusted targets, their movements practiced but hurried. The heat beat down on all of them, but only Ella moved without the benefit of a clean uniform or a shaded station. The ammo crate she had carried bore the marks of 100 deliveries like this. Its metal bands were dented at the corners, and the wood grain was dark with age and oil. It had served without recognition, much like the hands that carried it now. Ella flexed her fingers once before picking up another crate. The weight shifted against her palms, familiar and steady. As she crossed the range again, her shadow stretched long behind her. The soldiers continued their preparations, their voices rising and falling in bursts of bravado and laughter. One of them turned briefly, noticed her, and then dismissed the sight without comment. His attention returned to his rifle, which he polished with a cloth more gently than he might have handled glass. Another soldier cracked a joke loud enough for his group to hear, and they roared with easy amusement. Ella kept moving. The heat rose around her, and the wind kicked at the dust along the edges of the tarmac, swirling it into low clouds that coated boots and gear alike. She stepped lightly through it, each stride measured. The crate balanced perfectly against her hip. Past the firing line, the dignitaries shifted beneath their awnings. A foreign officer pointed toward a display of precision rifles, and his translator murmured in his ear as they watched a demonstration shot hit a target clean at 100.0 yards. Applause followed, brief and polite. Ella watched as the shooter grinned and raised his hand in mock salute, soaking in the admiration that drifted his way. The hum of the bass rose and fell, layered with the sounds of machinery, voices, and the steady beat of preparation. Ella's presence remained part of the background noise, like the wind or the buzz of heat off metal. The dust on her boots thickened with every pass she made, and still no one saw her. She paused at the edge of the supply tent, setting down the second crate. Her eyes scanned the line of shooters, the polished weapons, the officers standing tall. She saw the way the performance unfolded, all noise and shine and certainty. And still, she said nothing. She adjusted her grip on the empty crate, turned, and walked back into the heart of the heat and dust, where she would continue her work unseen, as always. As the sun climbed higher, the heat deepened, the noise rose, and the spectacle continued. Ella moved through it all like a ghost that no one thought to name, her boots quiet against the scorched concrete, her shadow lost among the shadows of machines and men. The laughter began as a ripple, soft enough at first to be mistaken for conversation. It spread quickly, rising above the hum of the range as heads turned toward the quiet figure standing near the edge of the supply tent. The colonel stood at the front of the firing line, tall and confident, his polished boots gleaming in the sun. His voice rang out across the tarmac, loud enough for the dignitaries to hear, loud enough to draw every gaze in the area. "Well now, looks like our supply crew wants in on the action," he said, his grin wide and theatrical. He did not wait for a response. His hand shot into his pocket, and a glint of metal caught the light as he drew out a coin. He flipped it once, then again, letting it spin high into the air before catching it neatly. The coin gleamed in the sun, its edge sharp, its face worn smooth by time. The officers near him chuckled, their posture easy, their confidence unshaken. One of them leaned toward a junior soldier and whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear, that it would be a fine show to break up the day. Another elbowed his neighbor, already fishing his phone from his pocket to record whatever spectacle might follow. Ella stood still, the dust on her boots undisturbed, her hands at her sides. She said nothing. Her eyes remained steady, watching the colonel as he paced in front of the line, coin in hand, voice carrying. "Tell you what," the colonel said, turning to the group at large, including the foreign officers watching from beneath the awnings. "Let's give our helper here a shot. Maybe she'll surprise us. Maybe she'll win a prize." His tone dripped with amusement. No one expected a prize to be won. A soldier stepped forward with a smirk and handed over a rifle. Holding it out like an offering meant more for the crowd than the shooter. Another, younger, with a face still too fresh for the lines of combat, offered a pink ear protector with a flourish. "Here," he said, laughing. "Might as well look good while you try." The laughter swelled, rising and falling like waves against the quiet figure who accepted both items without hesitation. Ella took the rifle first, her hands steady as she adjusted the sling across her shoulder. The weight settled against her with familiar ease, as if the metal recognized the grip of someone who understood it. She took the ear protector next, turning it over in her hands once before slipping it on. The pink plastic shone like a beacon of mockery, but she wore it without complaint. The colonel raised the coin high, holding it between two fingers so that the sun caught its edge. The metal flashed bright, a tiny sun against the sky. He let it fall, then caught it again, testing its balance. He glanced at the crowd, seeing the eager faces. The phones raised to capture the moment. He turned back to Ella, his grin fixed. "Ready when you are," he called, his voice loud enough to echo off the vehicles parked nearby. Ella did not answer. She did not need to. She stepped forward, the rifle balanced against her shoulder, her eyes on the spot where the coin would rise. She adjusted the stock against her cheek, checked the sight without rushing, and let her breath settle. The coin flipped into the air, the colonel's hand sure and practiced. It spun high, catching the sunlight with each turn, rising against the pale sky like a challenge. The soldiers leaned forward, the dignitaries watched with polite interest, and the phones recorded every second. The rifle felt solid in her hands. The stock fit beneath her cheek like it had been carved for her alone. The trigger sat beneath her finger, waiting. She saw the coin's edge glint as it reached its peak, saw the way it turned, saw the exact moment when gravity would take hold. Around her, the laughter continued, though quieter now, expectant rather than cruel. The soldiers waited for the failure they had already imagined, waited for the embarrassment that would seal the joke. Ella's breath moved slow and even. The world narrowed to the arc of the coin, the weight of the rifle, the moment between its rise and fall. She felt the familiar calm settle over her, the stillness that had come with every shot that mattered. The colonel lowered his hand, watching the coin fall, watching the woman he had made the center of his show. His grin remained, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, as if he sensed something shift. The coin spun downward, the sun glinting once more off its edge. The pink ear protector hugged Ella's head, a final reminder of the mockery that had brought her here. The weight of it did not matter. The laughter did not matter. Only the coin, the shot. The truth of the moment mattered. The rifle cracked, sharp and clean. The sound rang out across the range, loud enough to cut through the heat, loud enough to silence the last of the laughter. The coin's arc broke, the metal edge splitting in two, the halves spinning apart midair. The silence that followed felt heavy, as if the entire base had paused to listen. The halves of the coin hit the dust almost at the same time, landing feet apart, their gleam dulled by the dirt. Ella lowered the rifle with care, her movements unhurried, as if this had been no more than another task in a day filled with tasks. She removed the ear protector, folding it once in her hand, and let it hang by her side. No one spoke at first. The colonel stood frozen, the grin gone, his hand still raised as if he meant to catch the coin. The phones kept recording, but the hands that held them shook slightly, as if the weight of the moment had not been expected. A single voice broke the quiet, a whisper from the back of the crowd. "Did she just—" The words trailed off, unfinished. Ella stood still, waiting for nothing, asking for nothing. The coin halves lay in the dust, the rifle quiet in her hands, the moment complete. The weight of the rifle in Ella's hands felt like the weight of memory. It settled against her shoulder with the familiarity of an old friend, solid and patient. The metal was warm from the sun, but beneath the heat, she felt the worn places where hands had gripped it again and again. As she steadied the stock beneath her cheek, the noise of the crowd faded. The laughter, the phones recording, the colonel's showmanship, all of it blurred at the edges, leaving only the rifle, the coin, and the quiet within. Her mind moved back through years as naturally as breath. She saw again the early mornings of her youth, the forgotten range at the edge of her grandfather's farm. The grass there grew wild, dotted with the yellow of dandelions and the soft purple of thistles. Mist rose from the low ground at dawn, curling around her boots as she crossed the field to where her grandfather waited. He always rose before the sun, and by the time she arrived, he would already be leaning against the fence, his cap low over his brow, his eyes on the horizon. His hands were weathered, the skin tough from work and time. She could still feel the weight of them as he adjusted her stance, the quiet patience in the way he guided her grip, her breath, her sight. He had been a marksman once, in a war whose stories he seldom told. When he did speak of it, his voice was low and steady, never for drama, never for attention. His lessons were simple. Watch the wind, know your tools, let your breath guide the shot. He taught her that mastery was not in loud displays or trophies, but in what the world never saw. The silver coin had appeared one morning when she was 16. He held it between his fingers, its edge worn smooth, its face dulled by time. Without a word, he flipped it into the air, and as it rose, he nodded once. She understood. The shot came as natural as the rising sun. The coin split clean, the halves falling into the grass at his feet. He bent to pick them up, slipped them into his pocket, and patted her shoulder. That was all. No speech, no applause. Just a nod that said, "Well done." Years later, that coin rested in a small wooden box in her dresser, tucked beneath worn maps and faded photographs. It was not something she displayed. It was not a prize. It was a reminder. Her rise through competition had been as quiet as her training. Ella had never sought the spotlight. She shot because the rifle felt right in her hands, because the challenge of each target mattered to her in a way the crowd never could. Her name had appeared in rankings, her face in a few articles, but fame was never the goal. She competed because it was the language she understood, the line between breath and action. And then came the truth that cost her everything. She uncovered the flaws by accident, reviewing data between rounds, noticing patterns that did not match. A batch of new rifles, purchased with fanfare and praise, had design failures that made them unsafe. It was not her place, they said later, to question the procurement. But when a younger shooter nearly lost his hand in a malfunction Ella had predicted, she spoke. She filed reports. She brought evidence. The result was swift and silent. Invitations stopped arriving. Her name vanished from team lists. The calls for interviews faded. No one answered her messages. She became, overnight, the shooter no one remembered. Ella left the arenas, left the circuits of polished stages and roaring crowds. She took the assistant role at the base because it let her stay near what she loved. The sound of a rifle's report, the feel of the stock beneath her hand, the shape of a target far down range. These things remained true. Each morning before the base stirred, she walked to the edge of the grounds where an old maintenance range stood forgotten. The targets were battered, the paint faded, the lines worn to the grain of the boards. But the space was hers. There, she trained as she always had. No applause, no scores, just the quiet rhythm of breath and shot. Breath and shot. As she steadied the rifle now, on this hot day before this crowd, those mornings returned to her. The mist on the grass, the cold bite of dawn air, the soft scrape of her grandfather's boots on dry earth. She felt the balance of the weapon in her hands, the way it became not an object, but an extension of thought and intent. The crowd around her waited for failure. They did not see the hours behind this moment. They did not see the early mornings, the silence, the integrity that cost her visibility, but never worth. She did not look at them. They did not matter. The coin mattered. The shot mattered. The truth of the moment mattered. The coin rose in the air, just as it had on that long-ago morning. The sun caught its edge, the light flashing off the metal as it spun. The breath moved in and out of her chest, steady, measured. The laughter at the edges of the range dimmed to a dull hum, distant and unimportant. She let the weight of her past settle, not as a burden, but as a foundation. The coin turned. The wind whispered across the range, and she knew, as surely as she had known on her grandfather's field, that the shot would speak where words never could. The integrity she carried, the quiet mastery handed down through generations, the strength built through hardship, all of it came to rest in the single, waiting breath before the trigger moved. Ella saw the world in that breath, the coin's arc, the light, the dust rising at the edge of the tarmac, the weight of the rifle familiar beneath her hands. She did not think of the crowd. She thought of the truth she carried, the truth that had cost her, and the truth that would not fail her now. And so, she waited, steady as the horizon, sure as the dawn, for the shot that was already hers. The coin rose into the air, its edge catching the full glare of the afternoon sun. For a moment, it seemed to hang weightless, spinning slowly, as if even gravity had paused to witness what would come next. The silver surface glinted with each turn, throwing flashes of light across the range. The soldiers stilled, their laughter trailing off into expectant quiet, their eyes following that arc of metal against the sky. The dignitaries leaned forward beneath their awnings, the heat forgotten, the moment too sharp to ignore. Phones, once raised in amusement, now captured it all. Lenses trained not on the coin, but on the woman standing silent and steady beneath its path. Ella felt the world narrow. The breath in her chest came slow and even. The weight of the rifle pressed into her shoulder, familiar, grounding. Her finger rested lightly against the trigger, not tense, not hesitant. The stock was warm beneath her cheek. The sight aligned without thought. She saw nothing but the coin, the arc of its rise, the point where gravity would take it. The dust shimmered along the ground. The wind was still. The noise of the range, of the soldiers, of the world, fell away. The coin turned once more, edge sharp against the pale sky. The breath moved out of her, slow as a tide, as the trigger eased beneath her finger. The shot came clean, a single crack that split the air. The sound echoed across the range, bouncing off the vehicles, the concrete, the distant walls. It rolled out into the heat, sharp and final, and then faded into silence. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, the coin broke. The two halves spun apart midair, caught in the last of the sun's flash, turning in separate arcs. The metal glinted once more as each piece fell, tumbling down through the quiet. They hit the dust almost at the same instant, one half landing near the edge of the firing line, the other bouncing once, then settling into the dirt. The gleam of silver dulled beneath a fine layer of dust, as if the earth itself claimed the proof of what had been done. The silence deepened. It was not the quiet of anticipation or of performance waiting for applause. It was the quiet of something true, something undeniable. The soldiers stood frozen, their eyes wide, mouths slightly open, as if words had been stolen from them. The colonel's hand, once raised in theatrical gesture, hovered midair, fingers still spread from the release of the coin. His grin faltered, his jaw tightening as his eyes darted between the fallen pieces and the woman who had split them. The dignitaries exchanged glances, some leaning closer to one another as if to confirm that they had indeed seen what had just happened. One lowered his sunglasses, squinting at the dust where the halves lay. Another reached for a phone, raising it to capture the aftermath. Ella lowered the rifle with care, her movements unhurried. She rested the stock against the ground, one hand still on the barrel, the other slipping off the pink ear protector and folding it neatly against her side. Her face remained calm, unchanged by the moment, as if what she had done required no acknowledgement. The phones that had once been raised in mockery now filmed in awe, lenses catching the split coin, the still figure of the shooter, the stunned expressions of the crowd. A slow murmur began at the edge of the group, spreading inward as soldiers shifted their stance, glanced at one another, unsure whether to speak or to remain silent in the face of what they had witnessed. The colonel cleared his throat, the sound loud in the hush that followed the shot. He stepped forward, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust with each stride. His grin returned, but it sat poorly on his face now, forced and thin. His voice, when it came, reached for ease, but found only strain. "Well," he said, too loudly, "looks like our guest here has a bit more talent than we expected." He gestured toward the fallen halves of the coin, as if trying to redirect the attention away from himself, away from the joke that had turned. "Fine shot. Very fine." The soldier said nothing. One bent slowly, almost reverently, to pick up one of the pieces of the coin. He turned it over in his hand, the metal warm from the sun, the edge clean where the bullet had passed. He glanced at Ella, then at the colonel, then back at the coin, as if weighing the meaning of it all. Ella stood still, asking for nothing, offering no reaction beyond the steady quiet that had always been hers. The rifle in her hand was no longer a prop of mockery. It was what it had always been, a tool, an extension of skill and intent. The pink ear protector, folded and forgotten at her side, seemed small now, a remnant of a joke no one dared repeat. The dust settled across the range, the last echoes of the shot gone, leaving behind only the weight of what had been done. The phones lowered, one by one, as the truth of the moment sank in. The colonel glanced once more at the dignitaries, at the cameras, at the faces turned toward him, and found no comfort in any of it. Ella shifted the rifle against her shoulder, turned with quiet precision, and began to walk back toward the supply tent. She left the coin halves where they lay, left the silence to speak in her place, left the crowd to reckon with what they had seen. The sun glared down, the heat unrelenting, but the air felt changed, charged with the memory of the single, perfect shot that had split more than a coin. It had split the moment itself, divided the before from the after, and left no space for mockery to return. As she walked, the soldier stepped aside, not by order, but by instinct, as if the path she took now belonged to her alone. The colonel watched her go, his voice caught behind his forced smile, his hands empty of coin or jest. And the range remained quiet, as if unwilling to break the truth that hung over it like the heat, heavy and undeniable. The stillness that followed Ella's shot seemed to stretch, holding the range in its quiet grasp. No one hurried to break it. The heat pressed down as before, but now it carried the weight of what they had all witnessed. A senior officer from the visiting delegation, his uniform sharp beneath his open jacket, took a step forward. His eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in the focused gaze of someone who was trying to recall a memory that hovered just beyond reach. He studied Ella's face, the way she stood, the calm in her posture. He spoke softly at first, more to himself than to the others. "Ella Carrington. I know that name." His voice rose slightly as he turned to those nearby. She was the one, the sharpshooter at the Nationals, the one who walked away. The words stirred the air like the first breeze before a storm. Murmurs spread among the soldiers, rippling through the group as heads turned, as those who had laughed now leaned in to hear. A junior officer repeated the name, his voice low with surprise. Someone else nodded, recognition dawning. The colonel stood rigid, his smile strained, his hands clasped behind his back as if holding himself in place. The forced praise he had offered moments ago felt empty in the face of this revelation. His earlier mockery lingered in the minds of those who had heard it. A sharp contrast to the truth now unfolding. One of the dignitaries spoke to a colleague in a language not all understood, but the tone was clear. Respect, tinged with curiosity, as if they wondered how someone like Ella had ended up here, silent and unseen until this moment. The junior soldier who had offered the pink ear protector stepped forward, his earlier bravado gone. He bent down, brushing the dust from one of the split coin halves. His hands were careful, almost reverent, as he lifted the piece and turned it over in his palm. He straightened, hesitated, then walked toward Ella, offering the coin half without a word. His eyes met hers, uncertain at first, then steady, as if seeking forgiveness for what he had not said, but what had been implied. Ella took the piece with a nod, her grip light, her face unchanged. The coin rested warm against her skin, the edge clean, the weight familiar. The second half was retrieved by another soldier, this one older, his hands calloused. He handed it over with a quiet salute, a gesture of respect that needed no explanation. A foreign general approached, his boots stirring the dust at his feet. His voice was deep, his accent thick, but his words clear. "Madam Carrington," he said, inclining his head, "your shot was beyond fine. I would ask your insight on our calibration methods, if you would grant it." Ella met his gaze, kind but firm, and shook her head gently. "The focus today is the team," she said, her voice carrying enough to be heard, but not raised. "What matters is the mission." The general accepted this with a nod, his respect undiminished. He stepped back, allowing the moment to remain hers. The colonel shifted his stance, trying once more to reclaim control of the scene. His voice was loud, too loud, as he spoke. "Indeed, we are fortunate to have such unexpected talent among us, a fine reminder of the depth of skill on this base." But the words rang hollow, the performance threadbare in the face of what had unfolded. Ella did not answer. She let the silence speak in her place. Around her, the soldiers who had once looked past her now looked at her with new eyes. Some nodded, small, respectful gestures that meant more than the loudest cheer. A few stepped back to clear her path, no longer out of duty, but out of recognition. The rifle, once handed over as a prop in a joke, was now lifted by one of the range officers with care. The barrel checked, the stock wiped clean of dust. The phones that had recorded the moment lowered slowly, as if their owners felt the weight of what had been captured. One soldier pocketed his device without looking at it, his expression thoughtful. Another watched Ella with quiet wonder, as if seeing her for the first time. Ella remained still, the two halves of the coin resting in her palm. She turned them once, felt the clean break with her thumb, and slipped them into the pocket of her worn jeans. The metal settled there, close to the cloth worn thin by work and time, close to where she kept the memories that mattered. The sun hung lower now, casting longer shadows across the range. The heat softened slightly, the edge of it dulled by the coming evening. The noise of the bass returned little by little, but the tone had changed. It was no longer the laughter of mockery, but the hum of a place where something true had happened. Something that left no need for further show. Ella glanced once at the colonel, met his eye for a brief second, and looked away without challenge or gloat. Her dignity remained intact, untouched by his attempts at recovery. She turned toward the supply tent, toward the work she had come to do. The rifle no longer slung, but carried with care, as it deserved. As she walked, a young soldier fell in beside her for a few paces. His voice was low, respectful. "Ma'am, if you ever have time, I would be honored to learn from you." She offered him a faint smile, the first of the day, and nodded, Focus on your mission, she said. That's lesson enough for now. And with that, she moved on, leaving behind a range forever marked by the shot that spoke louder than any words could have. The sun slipped lower behind the distant ridgeline, casting long streaks of gold across the now quiet range. The heat of the day softened as the breeze returned, stirring the dust that had settled over boot prints and shell casings. The loud voices, the laughter, and the bravado had faded with the last of the spectators. What remained was the low hum of equipment being powered down, and the rustle of canvas as tents were folded and secured for the night. Ella moved through the space as she always had, steady and unnoticed, except now the glances that followed her were different. Soldiers passed with nods, small acknowledgments that spoke more than words might have. A young officer, his earlier smirk gone, offered a quiet, "Good evening." She returned the nod but kept her focus on the task at hand. The rifle, now treated with care, rested in her hands as she cleaned and checked it before returning it to the rack. The dust on her boots remained, but it felt less heavy now, as if the weight of dismissal had lifted from it. The colonel stood near the far end of the range, his posture no longer marked by the easy confidence that had filled him that morning. His hands were behind his back, his gaze on the horizon, his jaw set tight. When his eyes flicked toward Ella, there was no speech, no forced praise, only silence. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his boots stirring the dust as he went. The last of the dignitaries climbed into waiting vehicles, their conversations quiet, their expressions thoughtful. The engines hummed to life, carrying them away from the day's events. The range grew still, the soft clink of metal on metal as gear was packed, the only sound that remained. Ella took her time gathering what little she had brought. The pink ear protector, once a tool of mockery, she set gently on the bench beside the cleaning kit. She folded a cloth over the rifle's stock, wiped down the barrel, and placed it back in its case. The crate she had carried that morning sat empty now, its wood warm beneath her fingers as she lifted it and set it aside. The light dimmed further, shadows stretching long across the field. The range, once a place of noise and spectacle, seemed at peace. The dust settled once more, coating the ground in a soft veil that blurred the sharpness of the day's footprints. Ella walked the path back to the supply tent with the same quiet grace that had marked her every step. Those she passed offered small signs of respect, a hand raised in brief salute, a glance that lingered in recognition of what she had shown them. There was no applause, no speech, no grand gesture, and she wanted none. When the range was empty, and the last of the equipment secured, Ella made her way back to her quarters. The path was familiar, lined with low buildings and the hum of distant generators. The sky above had turned from gold to deep blue, the first stars pricking through the fading light. Her quarters were simple, a small space with bare walls and a single window that framed the night. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust, the scent of the day carried indoors. She set the crate down beside the door and removed her boots, shaking free the dust that clung to them. At the small table by the window sat a wooden box, the grain worn smooth by time. Ella opened it with care, revealing the silver coin her grandfather had once split with his own shot. She held it in her hand for a moment, feeling the coolness of the metal, the weight of memory. Then, she reached into her pocket and drew out the two halves of the coin from the range, placing them beside the older coin. The three pieces lay together now, the past and the present, joined in quiet witness to the truth of the day. Outside, the base settled into night, the sounds of the range replaced by the soft murmur of evening routines. Lights glowed behind curtains, voices low and distant. Ella sat for a time, the coins before her, the memory of the shot still clear in her mind. She did not dwell on the mockery that had preceded it, nor on the forced praise that had followed. What mattered was the moment itself, the clean break of the coin, the silence that had come after, and the quiet respect that lingered now. On the wall near the door, the base bulletin screen flickered once as it updated. The change was small, the kind of thing most would overlook. But there, among the list of names and roles, a new line appeared. Ella Carrington, Rangemaster, Advisor. No announcement accompanied it. No ceremony marked the addition. But it was there, in plain text, a quiet recognition that needed no more. Ella saw it as she passed, a faint smile touching her lips, brief and real. She stepped outside, the night air cool against her skin, the sky wide and endless above. The coins remained on the table, the window open to the breeze, the room filled with the soft promise of peace. The day had ended as it should, not with applause, but with truth left standing where all could see it. And that was enough. In the end, what mattered most was not the applause that never came, or the spotlight that never found her. It was the quiet truth of Ella's strength, the kind that does not ask to be seen to exist. She showed that self-worth is not given by others, but lived each day through action and integrity. Her story reminds us that real power often lies in those overlooked, those who work with steady hands and clear purpose, even when no one is watching. Ella's journey speaks to the dignity of standing firm, of letting your actions carry your voice. Take a moment to reflect on what quiet strength means to you. Share your thoughts below. And if this story spoke to you, follow for more moments where courage shines without needing to ask for the light.